Gold did not save Spain. It buried it. Picture the Atlantic at dawn. Heavy galleons pushing through dark water, their hulls creaking under the weight of silver. Bells rang in port cities as sails appeared on the horizon. Crowds gathered. Priests prayed. Officials counted. In royal vaults, metal stacked higher than memory, cold and bright under torchlight. To the outside world, this looked like destiny. An empire chosen by fortune. An empire rewarded by history. But beneath the shine was a dangerous illusion. Spain did not grow powerful because it produced more than its rivals. It grew powerful because it extracted more. And extraction, no matter how vast, is not the same as strength. Think about that for a moment. One creates momentum. The other only delays collapse. From the start, Spain's wealth arrived with clock already ticking. Every shipment of silver was greeted not as capital to be built upon, but as revenue already promised elsewhere. Wars across Europe demanded payment. Armies on distant fronts required constant supply. Fleets had to be built, crewed, armed, and replaced. Empire was not a possession. It was a subscription with no option to cancel. The costs rose faster than the treasure could arrive. Gold crossed the ocean, but it never rested. It moved from vault to battlefield, from treasury to creditor, from crown to contract. Money arrived already spent. That is a paradox at the heart of Spain's story. The richest empire on earth was always short of cash, always negotiating, always borrowing against tomorrow to survive today. This was not a failure of ambition. It was a failure of structure. Spain believed wealth itself was power. The more silver it pulled from the ground, the stronger it assumed it became. But money is not power unless it changes behavior. And Spain's behavior changed in the wrong direction. Easy wealth weakened discipline. It softened incentives. Why reform taxation when treasure ships were expected? Why invest in production when foreign goods could be bought instantly? Why restrain military commitments when credit was always available, at least for now? Over time, strategy gave way to habit. Spending replaced planning. Credit replaced restraint. Future wealth was sold to pay for present survival, again and again, until the future itself was no longer available. The illusion was convincing because it was loud. Victories were visible. Armies marched. Fortresses rose. Enemies negotiated. Maps were redrawn. The empire expanded not just across land, but across imagination. Spain seemed permanent. It seemed inevitable. Yet behind the pageantry was a quieter reality unfolding in counting rooms and contract chambers. Lenders tracked shipments more closely than generals tracked armies. Interest rates whispered truths that parades concealed. Every delay at sea sent shockwaves through the treasury. Every lost convoy meant salaries unpaid and obligations unmet. The empire's pulse was not measured in territory, but in timing. Could the next fleet arrive before the bills came due? This dependency created a dangerous rhythm. When treasure flowed, Spain appeared dominant. When it slowed, panic followed. Power that relies on uninterrupted inflows is not power at all. It is exposure. And Spain was exposed on every front. Its rivals understood this sooner than Spain did. They learned that the metal itself was not the prize. What mattered was what you built with it. Workshops, shipyards, financial systems, productive capacity. Spain exported its silver and imported everything else, including stability. The gold that made Spain look invincible was quietly strengthening others who knew how to use it better. At home, the effects were subtle but corrosive. Prices rose as silver flooded the economy. Wages failed to keep pace. Ordinary people felt richer on paper and poorer in life. Goods cost more. Food strained budgets. Savings lost value. Inflation did not announce itself as a crisis. It crept in year after year, shipment after shipment, eroding confidence and distorting decisions. But as long as silver kept arriving, these signals were ignored. Easy money dulls warning signs. It convinces leaders that problems are temporary, that solutions are just one more shipment away. The crown itself became trapped in this logic. Each success justified greater commitments. Each new war was framed as necessary, manageable, affordable. After all, more treasure was coming. This mindset transformed the state into a gambler who always believed the next hand would fix everything. Loans were taken with confidence. Defaults were rationalized. Promises multiplied. Creditors were reassured with projections, not reforms. Spain's financial reputation weakened even as its empire expanded. That contradiction should have been alarming. Instead, it was normalized. When wealth is abundant, risk feels theoretical. Consequences feel distant. Discipline feels optional. This is where the real danger took hold. Spain began to confuse motion with progress. Fleets moved. Armies marched. Silver flowed. But the underlying capacity to generate sustainable wealth did not grow. It shrank. Productive labor was neglected. Domestic industry withered. Skills migrated elsewhere. The empire became a conduit, not a creator, long before it recognized the cost. Think about the vulnerability this creates. What happens when a storm delays a fleet? What happens when a war disrupts a route? What happens when creditors lose confidence? An empire built on inflows can absorb shocks only as long as inflows remain uninterrupted. The stakes were enormous. Control of trade routes determined who set prices and who paid them. Dominance over rivals shaped the balance of power across continents. The fate of Europe itself depended on whether Spain could transform sudden riches into lasting strength. Failure would not mean immediate defeat. It would mean gradual erosion, influence slipping, options narrowing, choices becoming more expensive. Spain stood at the center of this dilemma, surrounded by gold and constrained by it at the same time. This is not a story of greed in its simplest form. Greed implies excess desire. Spain's problem was deeper. It was a belief that wealth could substitute for structure, that money could replace institutions, that extraction could stand in for production. That belief changed behavior at every level. It rewarded short-term thinking. It punished restraint. It encouraged expansion without consolidation. Over time, it reshaped the empire's instincts. Spain did not ask how to become resilient. It asked how to last until the next shipment. The central question is simple but brutal. How does an empire drown while surrounded by gold? The answer lies in misunderstanding what wealth actually does. Money amplifies existing systems. It does not correct them. If a state rewards consumption over creation, money accelerates decline. If a state relies on credit instead of capacity, money deepens dependency. Spain's gold did not create strength. It concealed weakness long enough for that weakness to become permanent. By the time the illusion began to crack, habits were already entrenched. Expectations were fixed. Commitments were locked in. The empire could no longer pause, no longer retrench, no longer rethink without risking immediate collapse. Easy wealth had removed the option of adjustment. That is the quiet destruction excess brings. Not sudden ruin, but the slow elimination of alternatives. Spain's story begins here, not at the moment of defeat, but at the moment wealth convinced an empire it no longer needed to change. For a time, Spain looked unstoppable. Power radiated outward from the crown in a straight, unbroken line, stretching across oceans and continents. Orders issued in royal chambers echoed in colonial cities thousands of miles away. Authority felt absolute. Mines thundered day and night. Silver was torn from the earth at a scale the world had never seen. Armed convoys crossed the Atlantic in disciplined formation. Their cannons pointed outward, their holds packed with metal. Soldiers were paid on time. Cathedrals rose stone by stone. Courts glittered. Rivals watched and recalculated. To outsiders, this was a model empire, blessed with reach, resources, and apparent unity. It seemed to have solved the ancient problem of power. Spain did not need to innovate in the way others did. It did not need to experiment, to refine production, or to struggle through inefficiency. It could buy what it lacked. Weapons were purchased from abroad. Ships were built with foreign timber and foreign skill. Cloth, tools, even food arrived from outside the empire, paid for with silver pulled from the ground. This was presented as strength. Why strain to produce when the world was willing to sell? Why invest in slow reforms when treasure ships offered instant solutions? On the surface, this logic felt efficient, even sophisticated. Spain had discovered a shortcut to dominance. And for a while, the shortcut worked. Wealth masked inefficiency. Problems that would have forced reform in poorer states were postponed indefinitely. Inflation crept upward, but it was tolerated. Prices rose faster than wages, but silver filled the gap. Domestic production declined, but imports replaced it. Debt accumulated, but lenders were patient. Everyone believed the same story. The next fleet would fix everything. Each shipment reinforced the illusion. As long as silver kept arriving, consequences could be delayed, and delay felt like control. This is how the illusion of strength hardens, not through deception, but through repetition. Spain succeeded again and again without changing its underlying structure. Victories confirmed existing habits. Expansion rewarded the same choices. Over time, the empire mistook momentum for stability. It believed that because the system had not failed yet, it could not fail at all. Think about how dangerous that assumption is. Success becomes evidence that nothing needs to change. Wealth becomes proof that the model works. And the longer it works, the harder it becomes to imagine alternatives. At the heart of this illusion was a quiet shift in incentives. Production is difficult. It requires patience, investment, and discipline. Extraction feels easier. The resource is already there. The labor is visible. The reward is immediate. Spain leaned fully into extraction and allowed production to drift elsewhere. Workshops fell silent, not because they were forbidden, but because they were unnecessary. Farmers struggled, not because land vanished, but because imported goods undercut local output. Skills migrated. Industry relocated. The empire was consuming itself slowly, one purchase at a time. From the outside, none of this looked like weakness. The empire's reach continued to expand. Its armies remained formidable. Its fleets controlled key routes. Rivals measured power by visible indicators: territory, ships, soldiers, treasure. By those measures, Spain dominated. But power measured only by scale misses something essential: resilience, the ability to absorb shocks, the capacity to adapt. Spain's system was optimized for flow, not endurance. As long as silver moved, everything functioned. When it slowed, even briefly, stress rippled through the entire structure. The crown's relationship with money reflected this fragility. Silver was treated as income, not capital. It funded current obligations rather than future capacity. Military commitments multiplied because they could be financed, not because they strengthened the empire's foundation. Each war justified the next. Each campaign created new costs, and each cost was answered with another promise tied to future treasure. Over time, the empire's finances became a chain of expectations. Break one link, and the entire structure strained. Debt played a crucial role in maintaining the illusion. Borrowing allowed Spain to act as if silver had already arrived. It smoothed gaps. It covered delays. It kept armies paid and suppliers satisfied. Credit made the empire appear seamless, uninterrupted by reality. But credit is not neutral. It shifts power toward those who provide it. As Spain borrowed more, it quietly surrendered leverage. Lenders gained influence. Interest consumed future revenue. Obligations hardened. The empire became less flexible with every loan, even as it appeared more capable. The public face of empire remained dazzling. Ceremonies continued. Titles multiplied. Architecture projected permanence. These symbols mattered. They reassured allies and intimidated rivals. They also reassured Spain itself. The empire saw its reflection in gold and mistook it for strength. But symbols cannot substitute for structure. A system built on inflows must constantly expand or risk collapse. Spain expanded because it had to, not because it should. Contraction was not an option. Pause was not an option. The empire had become too expensive to slow down. Imagine an empire that wins battles but loses its ability to stand alone. That was Spain at its peak. It could project force across vast distances, yet it depended on external production to function. It commanded territory, yet it lacked control over the processes that sustained daily life. It held treasure, yet it did not generate durable wealth. This contradiction did not feel urgent while silver was abundant. It felt theoretical. But theory becomes reality when conditions change. Other states watched and learned. They accepted Spain's silver and invested it differently. They built industries. They refined trade networks. They strengthened financial institutions. Spain funded the rise of competitors without intending to. Every transaction transferred not just metal, but opportunity. The empire paid others to become more efficient while it became more dependent. This was not betrayal. It was economics. Money flows towards systems that can use it best. Within Spain, the social fabric reflected these distortions. Wealth concentrated in visible centers of power. Inequality widened quietly. Productive labor lost status. Rent-seeking grew attractive. Why build when you could position yourself closer to the flow of silver? Why innovate when proximity to power offered fast rewards? Over time, this mindset reshaped ambition itself. Talent gravitated toward administration, court life, and extraction rather than production. The empire's human capital followed the money, and the money followed the metal. The illusion persisted because failure was not immediate. The system bent without breaking. Each crisis was managed. Each shortfall was bridged. This reinforced confidence. Leaders interpret survival as validation. But survival achieved through constant intervention is not stability. It is dependency managed at scale. Spain was managing its empire the way a debtor manages payments, always current, never secure. At its height, Spain looked like dominance. In reality, it was dependency wearing a crown. The empire's power rested on a narrow foundation. Uninterrupted inflows of silver and uninterrupted access to credit. Everything else was secondary. This made Spain formidable in the short term and fragile in the long term. The longer the illusion held, the harder it became to escape. Reform threatened existing privileges. Change risked disruption. And disruption, in a system optimized for flow, felt like collapse. This is the danger of wealth that arrives too easily. It answers questions before they are properly asked. It postpones reckoning. It convinces leaders that time is an ally when it is quietly becoming an enemy. Spain's apparent invincibility was not the result of perfect design. It was the product of momentum and metal. And momentum, once lost, does not return easily. The empire stood at its peak, surrounded by silver, convinced its own permanence. Beneath the surface, the foundations were thinning. The illusion of strength was complete. The cost of that illusion had not yet come due. The cracks did not arrive with noise or spectacle. They appeared quietly, in ledgers and markets, in prices that crept upward and wages that failed to follow. Silver kept coming, but its effect changed. Each new shipment felt smaller than the last, not in weight, but in power. Goods cost more. Obligations consumed a larger share of revenue. What once felt abundant now felt tight. Spain had flooded its own economy with money, and in doing so, it weakened the very currency it relied on. Silver lost its magic because it became ordinary. When everything is paid in metal, metal stops being special. This was the hidden cost of extraction, without balance. Money increased faster than productivity. The result was inflation, not growth. Prices rose because more silver chased the same amount of goods. Production did not expand to meet demand. It had been neglected for too long. Imports filled the gap, but imports drained silver outward just as fast as it arrived. The empire was running in place, exhausting itself to stay still. Think about that contradiction. The world's richest state could not stabilize its own prices. As silver flowed abroad, something else flowed with it: opportunity. Foreign merchants accepted Spain's metal and turned it into workshops, ships, and systems. They invested in production. They improved efficiency. They built capacity that multiplied value instead of merely transferring it. Spain, meanwhile, treated silver as a consumable. It paid soldiers. It serviced debts. It funded wars that produced no lasting economic return. The same metal strengthened others while hollowing Spain out from within. This was not exploitation by rivals. It was a predictable outcome of asymmetric use. Debt intensified the problem. Loans allowed Spain to act as if future silver was already secured. This smoothed short-term shocks but sharpened long-term vulnerability. Every loan came with interest. Every interest payment claimed a share of future shipments. Over time, more and more silver arrived already spoken for. The empire's flexibility vanished quietly. Choices narrowed. Options disappeared. Credit had once been a tool. Now it was a constraint. Defaults followed, not once, but repeatedly. Payments were suspended. Terms renegotiated. Promises revised. Each default damaged credibility. Creditors grew cautious. Interest rates rose. Borrowing became more expensive. What had once been easy finance turned into a constant negotiation. Spain spent increasing energy managing its debts instead of reducing them. The empire was no longer using credit to expand capacity. It was using credit to survive. That distinction matters. One builds resilience. The other delays collapse. Wars magnified every weakness. Campaigns dragged on longer than expected. Costs exceeded projections. Fleets were delayed by storms or conflict. Sometimes they did not arrive at all. Each delay sent shockwaves through the treasury. Salaries went unpaid. Suppliers waited. Confidence wavered. The entire system depended on precise timing, and timing is fragile. An empire that cannot tolerate delay is an empire living on the edge. This is where the turning point emerged, not as a single event, but as a realization. Spain understood, slowly and painfully, that it could not function without constant inflows from abroad. The empire had become a conduit rather than a creator. Silver entered, passed through, and left. Value was not retained. Capacity was not built. Even victory became expensive. Even peace felt unaffordable. Every state needs moments of pause to rebuild. Spain had none. Pause meant default. Pause meant collapse. The economy beneath the empire kept shrinking. Domestic production declined further as inflation, and imports undercut local output. Skilled labor left or shifted into unproductive roles. Investment favored proximity to power rather than productive enterprise. The structure rewarded access, not efficiency. Over time, this distorted the entire economic landscape. Wealth clustered around administration and extraction. Innovation faded. Resilience eroded. Currency weakness compounded these problems. As silver lost purchasing power, Spain needed more of it to achieve the same effect. This created a vicious cycle. More extraction led to more inflation, which demanded more extraction. The empire was trapped by its own success. What had once been a blessing became a burden. The mines had to keep producing, not to grow wealth, but to prevent immediate failure. Think about that pressure. An empire forced to exhaust its resources just to stand still. Rivals sensed a shift. They did not need to defeat Spain militarily to weaken it. They only needed to wait. As long as Spain carried the cost of its own system, time worked against it. Other states diversified. They balanced trade. They strengthened institutions. Spain doubled down on extraction and borrowing because changing course felt too dangerous. Reform threatened existing arrangements. It risked short-term pain in a system already stretched thin. Leaders chose continuity over correction. The psychological effect of this trap was profound. When survival depends on uninterrupted inflows, decision-making becomes reactive. Long-term planning fades. Crisis management dominates. Each year is treated as an emergency to be solved rather than a foundation to be built. Spain's leadership operated under constant pressure, even during periods of apparent peace. The empire was never truly stable. It was merely functioning. Public confidence eroded slowly. Inflation touched daily life. Taxes rose to cover gaps. Promises were broken. Trust weakened. These effects were not dramatic enough to provoke immediate revolt, but they accumulated. The social contract strained. People sensed that something was wrong, even if they could not name it. Wealth was visible, yet scarcity was felt. That contradiction breeds disillusionment. The empire's military strength began to feel brittle. Armies still marched, but maintaining them required ever greater financial effort. Equipment aged. Logistics strained. Recruitment became harder. Each campaign delivered diminishing returns. The cost of projecting power rose faster than the benefits it produced. Spain was spending more to achieve less. This is the clearest signal of systemic decline. When effort increases but results shrink, the model is failing. At this stage, silver no longer saved anything. It merely postponed the reckoning. Each shipment bought time, not stability. Time was used to sustain commitments, not to reform them. The empire was consuming its future in measured installments. Every delay in confronting structural weakness made that weakness harder to address later. Options narrowed with each passing year. The most dangerous moment for any system is when it recognizes its dependence but feels unable to change. Spain reached that moment gradually. Leaders understood the risks of inflation, debt, and dependency. They discussed them. They warned of them. Yet action remained limited. The cost of transition seemed higher than the cost of continuation. This is a trap of large systems built on fragile foundations. Change feels like collapse, even when collapse is already underway. What happens when an empire cannot survive a pause? Spain found out. Delays became crises. Crises became normal. Normality shifted downward. Expectations adjusted to decline. The empire did not fall apart overnight. It wore down. It thinned. It lost elasticity. Silver kept coming, but it no longer created confidence. It no longer created power. It only maintained appearances. By the time the illusion fully shattered, the damage was deep and structural. The empire had spent decades mistaking inflow for strength. It had traded resilience for reach. When the flow slowed, there was nothing beneath it to catch the weight. The reckoning had been delayed so long that it could no longer be managed gently. Spain stood surrounded by metal that no longer mattered, locked into obligations it could not escape, operating a system that demanded constant sacrifice just to avoid immediate failure. This was not sudden ruin. It was exhaustion. And exhaustion is how empires end when wealth replaces wisdom. When collapse came, it did not arrive as fire or invasion. There were no final marches through ruined capitals, no single moment that announced the end. It arrived as decline. Quiet, measurable, relentless. Fewer ships left port. Fewer returned. Armies still existed, but they moved more slowly and achieved less. Influence faded before territory did. Spain did not lose everything at once. It lost leverage first. And without leverage, power becomes a memory that still demands payment. Rivals rose not because they discovered more gold, but because they built systems that transformed resources into productivity. They invested in shipyards, workshops, and financial institutions. They refined trade, stabilized currency, and spread risk. Spain had funded this transformation unintentionally for decades, sending silver outward while importing finished strength back in. When the balance shifted, those same rivals no longer needed Spain's metal as much as Spain needed their goods, their credit, and their stability. The terms of exchange reversed. Spain felt it immediately. Everything cost more. Every decision narrowed options further. At home, the empire's weaknesses became visible in daily life. Inflation lingered. Taxes rose. Public trust thinned. Wealth was still present, but it no longer circulated in ways that strengthened society. It pulled around obligations and administration, not innovation. Infrastructure aged. Production remained weak. The state spent more energy managing decline than reversing it. Each reform attempt faced resistance from interests shaped by decades of easy inflows. Change threatened livelihoods built on proximity to power rather than productive output. Decline became politically easier to manage than transformation. The military, once the clearest symbol of dominance, reflected the shift. Maintaining forces required ever greater resources. Equipment lagged. Recruitment strained. Campaigns consumed wealth without securing lasting advantage. The cost of projection rose faster than its returns. Spain still fought, but it no longer set the tempo. It reacted. And reaction is the posture of a power that has lost control of its trajectory. Territory receded gradually. Influence slipped quietly. The empire did not vanish. It thinned. Each generation inherited a smaller version of what came before, along with larger obligations tied to the past. Debts persisted even as capacity declined. Commitments outlived the conditions that made them sustainable. This is a cruel arithmetic of overextension financed by inflows. When growth stops, costs remain. When revenue shrinks, promises do not. Spain was left with monuments and memories, symbols of a time when silver seemed endless. Cathedrals stood, palaces endured. But stone cannot generate wealth. Memory cannot service debt. The state carried the weight of its own history, bound by decisions made when gold felt infinite and consequences felt distant. The empire receded not because it lacked courage or ambition, but because it lacked the economic foundation to sustain what it had built. The lesson is not that wealth is dangerous. It is that misused wealth is corrosive. Wealth that replaces discipline undermines it. Wealth that substitutes for production weakens it. Spain's gold did not create power. It postponed the need to build it. For a time, that postponement looked like success. But success measured by delay is still failure moving slowly. This story echoes far beyond its era. Any state that lives on inflows, resources, loans, easy money, faces the same risk. Inflows feel like strength because they arrive without immediate sacrifice. They encourage expansion. They reward consumption. They make restraint seem unnecessary. Over time, they reshape behavior. Reform is postponed. Productivity stagnates. Dependency deepens. The system becomes fragile while appearing rich. Think about the pattern. When money arrives easily, it is spent easily. When spending replaces strategy, the future is quietly mortgaged. The reckoning does not arrive as punishment. It arrives as exhaustion. Choices narrow. Margins disappear. Resilience erodes. By the time decline is undeniable, the tools to reverse it are gone. Spain did not fall because it lacked gold. It fell because gold replaced everything else. It replaced production. It replaced discipline. It replaced reform. And once that substitution was complete, there was no way back. The empire had optimized itself around flow, not foundation. When the flow weakened, the structure could not stand. This is a quiet end of empires in the age of economics. Not conquest, but misallocation. Not invasion, but imbalance. Not sudden collapse, but a long retreat from relevance. Spain's story is a warning written in silver and debt, carried across oceans, counted in vaults, and paid for over centuries. If this kind of hidden history matters, If you want to understand how money shapes power and how empires really fall, subscribe for more cinematic stories like this, and share this documentary with anyone who still believes wealth alone creates strength.